First of all, thank you for so kind words. Um, it's really amazing that people see us in this way here in Ukraine, and we are proud of this. But also, I'm super proud to be here today because of these three facts. So first of all, I'm not a typical speaker at such conferences because usually designers speak at different conferences. And like my core competence is design. I've never studied statistics, and it was pretty like I just missed my lections of higher maths because I was super interested in marketing, and I didn't have time to do this in my spare time. So, and the third thing is I built an experimentation framework at Preply, of course with the help of other people, but I was probably the main contributor to this framework. This is obviously a joke, but my point here is after you hear this information, you shouldn't go tomorrow to your colleagues, to your company, and start implementing it immediately. Because one size does not fit all, and what works for me very likely will not work for you. That's probably what you already heard from Igor. So, what matters for Preply? We agreed that speed of innovation is super important for us because we are operating on a highly competitive market. We also want to be confident in results we receive, and we want to see scalability in our approach. Currently, we have 6 product teams, and this number is continuously growing, so we want it to be scalable. And like I mentioned, it may not work for you. That is why start from the question, what matters for you? And before implementing something, try to find the answers to this question. This is the brief representation of how we used to operate before. So first of all, we were really mad about doing research. So the research was done by PMs, by a dedicated research department, by designers, by almost everyone. And we spent a lot of time doing that, and it slowed us down a lot. So in addition to this, we were building rocks, so-called rocks. You probably know this story about rocks, pebble, and sand. So we were focusing on 2-3 big features for every team per quarter. And what's also really important here, these 2-3 features were picked in a central manner, so the teams were not really autonomous here. The third aspect is sequential launching. So we try to avoid launching more than one experiment, at least at one page at a time. And we usually run it on the new users. We avoid running it on old users because we saw that it's a huge bias. They already sold the product. But in reality, those old users form the majority of our customers. So this is how we worked. Maybe someone knows this guy. It's Stuart Frisbee talking about A/B tests on the conference. And on this slide, the point is for Booking.com, 9 out of 10 tests usually fail. And this is very similar to the reality we observe at our company. So we were pretty concerned about the sustainability of this approach of building rocks. Very interesting question, like how size of the feature correlates with the impact of this feature. And like intuitively, our expectations usually they're bigger and cooler feature you build, the more impact you will see. But in reality, there is no correlation between size of the feature and the impact of the feature. I will give you an example. So first of all, we had a project called Recurring Lessons, and we really saw that it will be a killer feature. To give you some brief explanation what it is, on our platform, customers may book some lessons, and they need to book them one by one for every single lesson. And this feature allowed them to set the schedule, like, for example, every Tuesday. And forget about scheduling those lessons at all and reach consistency. And we believe that consistency is super important to form a habit. So everybody was 100% sure that it will bring us super success. But in reality, it brought us nothing. And another day, we actually sat with our CTO and my co-founder and did one experiment almost for fun to double check if we really can launch an experiment during an hour. So the experiment was just a fake checkbox, and this fake checkbox had a line of text saying something like, I want to get a free replacement in case I don't like my tutor. And then the result was really surprising. We observed 22% increase in GMV. So we didn't believe it true, and we double-checked everything 100 times. But we figured out that it's true, and this checkbox really brought us 22% in GMV. We explained it in a pretty obvious way that our customers were not aware of this possibility to change the tutor for free if they don't like this tutor. So as you see, the size of the feature in this example doesn't have any impact on anything. The question I was continuously asking myself, knowing all this information, is how long it will take me to find those 10 winners if we do all this stuff in a sequential way. And this question was really horrible to me. So I'll give you an example with some random numbers, let's say. It's not like our metrics, but still. So imagine that you have 1 million unique participants monthly, which means you have a pretty sustainable business. And like your baseline conversion rate is 2%, which is also super, I would say, very often you can see 2% as e-commerce conversion rate, and it will be considered as a really good conversion rate. So, and let's say that we want to detect at least 5% increase, then you can take any sample size calculator, and it will say you something like you need 300,000 participants per variation. And now imagine that you have 10 to 20% success rate of those experiments, and we can easily calculate how much time do we need to spend to find those 10 winners. So it may take years, maybe a year. It depends on the specifics of your approach, but it's not that speed we wanted at Preply. So at some point, luckily, one of our investors is a former CMO and the co-founder of Booking.com. It's definitely an unfair advantage in this story. But he was super kind to introduce us to his former colleague, Jasper. So Jasper actually was building Booking from 2001 to 2012, and all these persuasion things happened, I believe, because of him. So they found that persuasion is super efficient for them, and they started developing this concept. So on the left, you see their email from the CEO saying that we need to organize ourselves for this visit. And here is my, like you also see, very popular tweet about his visit. He introduced us to absolutely different reality of running experiments. And I'll tell you about it in more details. So first of all, I want to ask you to raise your hand if you ever heard the statement that you shouldn't run tests in parallel. Okay. By the way, is there anybody who runs tests in parallel? Cool guys. So yeah, this is a very popular statement you can find on different blog posts, etc. And the main argument those guys have usually looks like this. But they show you buttons where they first color the background of the button and then their text on the button. In some case, the color is the same like background and you don't see any text on button. But I brought a truly Ukrainian example to explain this concept. So imagine that we have a hypothesis that water works better than milk, or milk works better than water. And we have also apples, and we believe that cucumbers, and specifically pickled cucumbers, will work better. So what will happen if we run those two experiments in parallel? Any ideas? I'll show you. So technically, we will have four groups of participants that will be split equally in these tests. And three of groups, I have no idea what results bring you, but the fourth group is very likely to bring you a surprising results. So, but wait, I knew that Booking.com, Airbnb, other giants, Uber, were running thousand experiments at any time. And I was curious how they do that if those interactions are so horrible and scary thing. So, as you see here, Booking states that they run 1,000 experiments at any time, Airbnb 500, Uber 1,000 as well. Maybe these numbers are a little bit different because those articles were not written yesterday, but still we know that these numbers are much higher than our numbers. I still ask myself a question how it's possible to run such a big number of experiments at the same time without making them in parallel. And the answer is it's not possible. Does anybody know what ResearchGate is? Nobody? Okay, then I'll give you a present today. So all these blog posts you might read on the internet, usually written by bloggers. Okay, that may be not always true, but usually it's true. And true scientists, they love to write academic papers. And one day I found this resource that contains a lot of academic papers from the guys like Booking, Microsoft, Uber, etc. And these guys state, like in many different academic papers, I found this statement that interactions are relatively rare. In this case, Ron Kohabi says that from their observations, these interactions are more related to bugs, but it also can be some logically conflicting experiments that were launched without their awareness of each other. That's probably the main problem in this case. So now I knew that I can run parallel experiments and don't really care about those interactions. But the question was, is it the end of my journey? And surprisingly, it was not the end of the journey. Because if you change something, in this case, if you make a decision to start running parallel experiments, you very likely will break the whole process in your company. You can't just use everything else and say that now we run everything in parallel. So your existing processes, infrastructure may require some changes to make it efficient, or at least make it work. So we've made the whole experimentation framework that now guides our teams. Like I mentioned, we have 6 cross-functional teams at the moment. And now they know how to do that. But it took time, and we had to do many difficult decisions. It's like version 1.0. I believe it still has big room for improvement, but it already brought us some really good results. It will definitely take me 1 hour to explain you every single aspect of those framework, but I gathered the key things I want to tell you about. So first of all, we truly believe that simplicity is the key here, and it's basically the key to success. And we want people to develop this skill because you always can do something in a very complicated way, but also you can do it in a simple and elegant way, which is very important for your code base, for the speed, for everything. So the second point is, because we understand that it's impossible to achieve the results we want running like 10 experiments per quarter, we want the teams to maximize the number of such tests they run. Of course, we state that we run them in parallel. And the important comment here is you can run only logically independent tests in parallel. If they have some potential interaction, which is obvious from the logic of experiment, you should obviously avoid running them in parallel. But these cases are really rare. I can probably give you one example from our practice. So when different teams created different banners for the same place on the website, and in one of their variations, we achieved having something like 3 banners, like one after another, and it definitely was super weird for the customers. And this is an example of how your experiments running by different teams can conflict sometimes from each other, and it's a big challenge for us now. But still, it's not that like big problem, and we relatively rarely observe such things. The next thing is small tests, single changes. I think I don't need to explain what single changes is, but does everyone understand this? No? Okay, so if you change multiple things on the same page and then run such an experiment, you will never know what worked for you. And this is very dangerous and harmful for your learning culture, because the number one goal of experimentation is learn more about your customers, uncover some insights, and double down on this information. So we asked team to run small tests, mostly small tests. Of course, we also have some strategic projects, and sometimes we just need to to develop something bigger or refactor something. But in general, the rule is small tests and single changes. We don't change many things at a time. The fifth rule is, how many of you have heard about the concept of North Star metric? Okay, so the North Star metric is a metric that perfectly visualize the value of your business for the customer. So very often it can be money, or for example, in our case, our North Star metric is the number of confirmed hours students take on the platform. But we went further, and we created a set of metrics that have high correlation between each other. We have 4 of these metrics, and teams can call tests based on any of these metrics. So if at least one metric is positive and it's significant, then you can say that the experiment was successful. If it's significant into the positive side. So then, entry criteria. Before that, like I mentioned before, we ran everything on new users, and now the reality is we try to include almost everyone into experiments. The general rule is everybody who will see this change has to be included into experiment. I'll tell a little bit later of the benefits of these two, but let's finish the list. So the 7th rule is we check our experiments only after full week cycles. You probably know what seasonality is, and this is kind of a micro seasonality, so weekly seasonality, because the behavior of your customers may be different on weekends and on work days, and you should take it into account. We many times solve this different behavior, and for us it's very important to keep full week cycles. And we run no more than 5 weeks because we don't see much sense in running experiments like 3 months or something like that if we can't reach significance for the minimum uplift we set for ourselves. We make a decision to iterate this experiment or to kill this experiment. Sometimes it can be scaled as well. And jumping to 9, this decision, if the experiment is not significant, belongs to the team. So because of different reasons, the team may want to keep this experiment, scale it, develop it, and maybe this is a part of a strategic decision or something like that. So we allow them to make those decisions. And the last one is autonomy in generating hypotheses. Before that, we had this centralized approach to assigning all these hypotheses to the teams. And being frankly honest, they were not super happy with that because they didn't feel any autonomy. And they wanted to have this autonomy because it motivates them a lot. And once they are motivated, we have better results. So you probably know the word top-down approach. So we got rid of those top-down approach, and now they generate hypotheses themselves, and they are allowed to run any things they want to run. From another side, it became a little bit uncontrollable. If 6 teams are running the big number of experiments, you can't just form a centralized team of people who will be reviewing all this stuff. And that is why we don't care about it now, and they run everything they want. So that's probably it about this framework. And like I said, I want to dive deeper into 5 and 6 and tell you about the benefits of this approach. So before that, we had a practice of picking a custom metric for every single test. And it took a lot of cognitive resources for the teams and sometimes for our data scientists as well to come up with those metrics, the right metrics. So once you have the North Star set, you just don't care about those metrics because you know if any of those 4 metrics is positive, then great. You can call the experiment and celebrate it. The same thing with entry criteria. If you decide what you want, who you want to include in every single experiment, it also takes cognitive resources for the teams, and sometimes they start running experiments on segments, but we don't want to build 1,000 variations of our product for those customers who are from different segments and have different needs. So if you use this approach, the design of experiments become much more easier, and the teams don't use your data scientists to the extent when they are super mad and like disappointed about the work they do. But all this actually, the results of these changes we made. Before that, we launched, I would say, 10, 12 experiments per quarter. And now, at the end of this quarter, of the previous quarter, we calculated the number of experiments we've launched. And we figure out that we've launched more than 70 experiments, which is like, let's say, more than 5-6 times than we had before. And from the other side, like we expected, it brought us more significant tests with positive results. And I still believe there is big room for improvement because it takes some time to adopt any process you decided to implement in your company. So maybe this quarter we will achieve something better than this. But already this is a good sign that we are moving to the right direction. We also have challenges because this is not ideal approach and it has some pitfalls and a lot of things can be changed. And we have internal discussions about this and try to adjust the information we received from Booking to our own reality. Because we believe what worked for them is very different from what will work for us. So first of all, the funny thing and very expected one is our product teams sometimes are tweaking, let's say, button colors, but this is not literally. They just do some not very meaningful experiments for the customers. And we are struggling with this, and we try to educate them that it's not the best approach. And in addition to this, they see the results of these tests, and they make some conclusions and don't do this more. So also the problem, maybe it's a wider problem of like running a product with cross-functional teams, but when you have 6 teams who are doing such a number of experiments each quarter, you are really cluttering the interface. And it's dangerous, and it's something that should be observed by head of design, head of product, etc. So we are also struggling with that and trying to find some treatment to this problem. So the third problem I already mentioned before is logically conflicting tests. So sometimes it's not super easy for the guys to understand which experiment will conflict with each other, and we may face some issues here as well. The last one is infrastructure and processes. Our existing infrastructure were not super ready for these changes, so we needed to change it as well. The final thing I'll quickly tell you about is what are the plans. So one day I found the framework telling about the maturity of experimentation, and it was also that ResearchGate website. I tell you that's gold. So, and they classified different aspects of experimentation culture and stated what will be their, like, how the state will look like if it's mature or in the middle of the road or something like that. So on scaling, you can't do everything, like, you can be hands-on, and that is why automatic detection of anomalies is very important, because otherwise it will be hard to find those interactions. So then we want to experiment with Bayesian testing, because we see some potential pros in this approach for us. And the third one is a single formula for calling experiments that may give you a chance to automate calling your tests. It's, for me now, it's something from the sci-fi, but people say that it may work and the test can be stopped automatically.
Sergey, we're over time. We're going to finish.
Sorry? That's it. If you want to know more, just drop me a line and I'll be happy to reply to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.